Okay, I'm going to get started. Welcome, everybody. We have a lot of people joining. We've had hundreds of people register, so I know that a lot more are going to be joining as we go. But because we have so much to cover and we really want to make sure that we've got time for questions, we're just going to jump right in and get started. So want to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining today's AMA. We're going to have a chance to ask anything about MCP, the Model Context Protocol, to our panel of experts here. First, I want to say hello. I'm Bill Cava. I am an advisor of Custom GPTs and CEO of Generative Labs, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be moderating today's discussion. We have an all-star lineup here of people who are literally building the future of AI. So we've structured this as a true AMA. There'll be no sales pitches, no marketing fluff. It's just straight talk from the experts. And it's geared towards anybody, whether you know something about MCP or you don't, this session will have something for you. So we're going to jump in to quick introductions. I'll be introducing the panelists and giving a quick overview of what they'll be discussing today. And after their discussions, then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So next slide will be the agenda. So first up in today's conversation, we're going to have Santiago. Santiago is a computer scientist with 30 years of experience in software development. He teaches production level machine learning and has a very popular course at ML.school where he offers programs to help people level up their ML and AI expertise. So Santiago is going to kick things off first, and he is going to be talking about MCP fundamentals. Then we'll have Mike from Microsoft. Mike is a principal program manager at Microsoft, and he's actually also on the technical steering committee for the OpenAI initiative, and he's collaborating with Anthropic on the official SDK for MCP for Microsoft with regards to C#. Then we'll hear from Arjun at Pinecone. He's a DevRel engineer, and he built their first MCP server implementation connecting vector databases to AI assistants. So he'll be sharing his work there. And then we'll hear from Alden. He's the CEO at Custom GPT. Custom GPT is focused on anti-hallucination RAG, the most accurate RAG platform. And he'll be sharing the work that Custom GPT is doing with regards to MCP and RAG, allowing you to connect your business data to AI agents. So with all that said, I'm going to turn it over to Santiago. And Santiago, when you're done, just let me know and I'll introduce the next speaker. And then when all speakers are done, we'll open it up for questions. Santiago, the floor is yours.
Sure thing. And one thing that I wanted to mention is, as I go through these slides, if you have any questions, please add your questions in the Q&A section here in Google Meet. And we are going to try to go through all of the questions and answer them all, okay? So my goal here is just to give you a quick introduction to MCP. So if you don't know what MCP is, hopefully I'm going to convince you why this is such a cool, I'm not gonna call it standard, but I hope it becomes a standard at some point, but at least a very cool specification that makes AI agents very, very powerful. Okay, so first of all, the whole idea here is to standardize how any agent, how any AI application can interact with an external tool. And I want to show you, imagine that you're building just using existing tech, forget about MCP for a second. I want you to imagine that you're building an application that's gonna work like this. Imagine this is an AI agent, and the user wants this AI travel agent to book a flight to Spain for a specific date. So that's the query that we send to our application. You can see the query right here. I want to book a flight to Spain next week. Now, this application will have to connect to every single API of, travel companies out there. So for example, we're going to have to connect to the American Airlines API, the Iberia API, the Air Europe API. So you can imagine how big of a mess is doing all of that, especially because every single provider will have a very, very different specification for their APIs. And somehow we're going to have to hard code those connections. Somehow we're going to have to teach, quote unquote, or code into our application the connectivity to each one of those APIs. And that is a big, big problem, especially because that will create a lot of complex and brittle code. So imagine what happens when a provider, let's say American Airlines, decides to change their API. So now everything that we created is deprecated. We're trying to access now an old version of an API. In the software world, whenever we create a new API, we create this /version2 sort of like path. And from there on out, we start just implementing the new functionality. So now we're going to have to go back to our code and modify our code and do all of that. So MCP hopefully fixes all of this. Not hopefully, but it fixes all of these. Hopefully, we implement it well. We can get rid or around those problems. So MCP turns the problem of connecting any application to any tool into an M plus N problem instead of an M times N problem. So before MCP, right here on your left, you had every application that we wanted to implement. In order to connect that application with a tool, let's say to a specific airline API, we had to build every single one of those connections. So you get an M times N problem here. With MCP, now we don't have to do that, because now every provider, if they provide an MCP server, let's say every airline provides an MCP server, the only thing that we need to do is add support for that MCP, and that's it. Now, instead of an M times N problem, we have an M plus N problem. So this is the way it's going to look like. I want you to remember the previous slide where we had to implement these 3 connections, each connection going to the specific API. With MCP, now we only need to implement a connection to that protocol. So by adding access or giving access to the MCP protocol to our agent, now through that protocol, we can communicate with the specific MCP server from every single airline without having to do any custom implementation, okay? The agent can just take the specification automatically from those MCP servers and call the appropriate tools without us having to hard code anything. So same model here, but now way more efficient. Okay, so going faster here now through the behind the scenes of the way this works. This is sort of like the architecture of MCP, and you can read more of this, obviously, if you go to the specification. But in the architecture, we have a host, and imagine that the host could be, let's say you use the Visual Studio Code with Copilot. Well, your host will be the Visual Studio Code that has internally, anytime you try to connect to an MCP server, there's going to be a client, and that client will take care of the communication with every specific server. So here in the screen, I have an MCP client communicating with American Airlines MCP server. I have another MCP client connecting to Iberia, and I have another MCP client connecting to a hypothetical file system MCP server that's running on my local computer. So this is sort of like the way it works. You get the host, the clients, and the servers. Now, MCP is not just about accessing remote tools. And that's sort of like the main benefit, what everyone talks about. There is way more to MCP than just that. And this slide here hopefully illustrates some of that. For example, we have resources. So imagine that our travel agent wants to load the destination or documentation about the destination and the visa requirements to travel to Spain. Well, we can provide that using resources. Not just a tool. We talked about the tools here when we were doing the booking, but resources would be something different. We can have prompt templates. We can have elicitation where we ask the user, we have a communication going back and asking the user, hey, can you give us, let's say, how much money you want to spend in this trip? So we can actually book something that's in budget. So basically here now the server is asking the client, give me information, or the client is offering the server access to the file system. So the server, if the server needs a passport photo, it can just go to the file system and upload the photo from there. Or we have sampling, which is super cool, where the server can actually ask the client to run a specific query through the local LLM. So the server does not need an extra LLM there. It can just use the same LLM that the server has, the client has access to in order to run queries. So this is sort of like a very, very high level of everything that's everything offered by the standard. I'm not gonna read what we have on the screen, but just like quick overview. The MCP client offers sampling, roots, elicitation. Those are some of the three things that you see in the specification. The server will give you access to tools, resources, and prompts, okay? You're gonna get access to this presentation, so don't worry about reading through all of this. My final slide here is that everyone wins with MCP. Number one, the application developers, because now everyone can connect their applications to existing MCP servers without having to work every specific connection. Like I can have my agents today, the ones that I'm building today, and give them access to existing MCP servers, functionality, extra functionality, without having to hard code anything. That's super, super huge. Number two is the people who are building these APIs, the people who are building these tools. Now, if they implement an MCP server, they literally, the client base is literally every single agent that we're building right now. Anyone can access now that functionality. And finally, obviously, the end users, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be benefiting from having better agents with access to better tools. So hopefully this convinces you that this is such a big thing, big step for us. So yeah, that's it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Santiago. That was fantastic. Definitely provided a fantastic foundation in terms of the protocol and an overview. So next up, we have Mike Kistler from Microsoft. I already introduced you, Mike, so you can jump right in.
All right, I'm going to jump in. Let's see if I can figure out how to share my screen here. Looks like I do this. Oh, you are not allowed to share your screen. Can I share my screen?
You should be able to. Yeah. If you need a minute to get that settled, we could jump into the next speaker.
It says I'm not allowed. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay.
Okay. Fantastic.
Let's just,
we're tech guys, but we're still figuring out tech, right?
Indeed. All right. So I can just move this over.
Fantastic. Yep. All good.
Yep. Okay. So want to start by saying thanks for having me. What I want to talk about today is about building MCP applications in C#. Bill said I'm the product manager for the C# MCP SDK. And just to give you a quick overview of this SDK, this is the official SDK for MCP. It's in the Model Context Protocol repo, but Microsoft is maintaining this because we have a lot of C# experience, and we really wanted to make sure that the C# SDK was really high quality. So we jumped in and offered to maintain it, and Anthropic said, sure, go ahead. It's currently version 0.3.0 preview 4. Now it's still in preview because the MCP stack is still evolving. I saw in the chat there was a question about, is this being developed? The MCP spec has been out since November of last year. So it's relatively young. It's had several iterations since then. The most recent is the 0618, 2025 0618 version of the spec. But there's continuing to be iterations. There's active development on it. And there may be some breaking changes that are coming. The spec is still young. We're about to release actually a 0.4.0 preview 1 that simplifies really and improves some of the API surface for the C# SDK. So watch for that coming. And we'll have documentation in there about how you upgrade if you've already used the previous version. We've got docs. You know, I've got my links over here to show you. Here's the actual SDK repo. I should bump up the resolution here a little bit. And here's our docs page. So we actually have documentation. You can come in here and you can go to the API reference and you can find, you know, all the good APIs that are here that we're providing in the SDK, both on the client side and on the server side. Okay. And this is used by a lot of Microsoft products already that are providing support for MCP servers. You know, things like the Copilot Studio, and Xbox actually is looking at doing this, and there's lots of companies or lots of products that are jumping on and starting to use this. Now, Santiago gave a great introduction to MCP. And so the C# SDK is trying to track the MCP spec very closely. So we support all the things that he was talking about. We support tools and tool calling. We support resources and templated resources. We support prompts. All those things are things that the server implements and provides to the clients. We provide the new authentication spec so that you can have authenticated MCP servers that support OAuth 2.1. We support elicitation and sampling. There's all the notifications that can flow between the server and the client and the server, things like progress and list changed and resource updated. And there are currently 2 transports that are defined for MCP. There's the standard IO one, which was kind of the original one. And there's also a streamable HTTP transport, and our SDK supports both of those. So standard IO is for something where you want to run it locally on your machine, and streamable HTTP is when you want to have your MCP server running somewhere else and you talk to it over HTTP. So that's just a quick introduction to the C# SDK and how you build MCP servers in or clients for that matter in C#. I'm going to give you a quick demo now of how this might look. I've got a couple of references here. One is the reference that I'm going to be using, which is just building an MCP server in our Learn documentation. And then if you're interested, there's a link to a YouTube video there that one of my colleagues did showing how you can vibe code an MCP server with GitHub Copilot, and that's a really interesting show. So let me come over here to my repo over here. This create a minimal MCP server using C# and publish to NuGet. This is a really nice tutorial here. It's a very quick, easy thing to go through that shows you how to use a template that we've built for MCP servers that you can just load up and get yourself a very quick MCP server with very little effort. So over here, I've got a repo, and I've got this open here. I'm running in VS Code, and I'm using a dev container. And something that I want to point out here is that my dev container is using .NET 10. .NET 10 is now in RC, which means a release candidate. And you can go out and try it now. You can do it in a dev container, so it's a very low risk thing. This is the setup that you would want to use. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll start up this dev container. So reopen a dev container. You can see I ran this before. So here we are. We're in the dev container, and I'll just show you .NET, list SDKs, and we've got .NET 9 and .NET 10 here. And .NET 10 is important for using this sample, okay, because it uses a new thing that's called DNX, a new command that we've implemented. And DNX is for .NET what NPX is for Node. It lets you run a tool basically by just pointing at the package and saying, go ahead and run it, okay? And that's used if you were going to publish this to NuGet. Now, we're not actually going to do that here. I'm just going to show you how we run locally. So to just follow the instructions here, I'm going to copy that command, and I'm going to install the templates. The templates are installed, and now I'm going to create a new MCP server from a template. Let me hide that. And I'm going to say -o dot because I want to put it right here. Okay, and look at that. Just that quickly, I've got an MCP server. You can see that I have a program.cs that pulls in the packages. It says I'm going to add an MCP server. This is using the standard IO transport. It's got one set of tools that are called the random number tools. The tools live up here. And this is a very simple tool. It just says, I'm going to give you a random number from 0 to 100. Down here, we have the CS_proj file. It's got all the stuff set up so that you can publish this to NuGet very easily. Down here, you can see where we have the package reference to our model context protocol. I'm going to actually update this to 0.4. Okay. And just like that, we have something that build. Right out of the box, very simple. Now, as I said, we could publish this to NuGet and actually run it, but I'm going to do something different. I'm going to actually install this as an MCP server in VS Code. So come up here to the MCP servers. I want to add an MCP server. I want it to run from standard IO. Then run. Let's call it my sample MCP server. I'm just going to put it in the workspace. I'll trust it. And that sets up a little configuration here that will run my sample MCP server. You can see that it says it's already running. That's in this MCP server.json. You can see that this is installed here by coming over here to the extensions. And down here in the extensions, it's got the MCP servers that are installed. And right there should be, well, I don't see it actually, but another way to look at this is to open up the chat and look here at the tools. You can see how I have all these tools, and there you see my sample MCP server. Okay, now I've got a whole bunch of tools here. I'm just going to, for demo purposes, disable everything that could get in the way of having a successful demo here. I'm just going to have my sample MCP server running here. Okay, and now you can see how I ran this before. So let's start a new chat, and let me just say, pick a random number. I'm almost done, Bill.
No worries. You're doing a great job.
So here you can see that Copilot is asking me, do you want to run this tool that you've got from the sample MCP server? It's going to give you a number, and I'll say allow, and it goes and calls it, and it says, well, your randomly picked number is 12. And so that shows you how quickly you can create an MCP server, install it into VS Code, and have it all up and running, available to you in Copilot. That's my demo.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciate that. Yeah, it's great to go from Santiago's high-level view of the architecture and the protocol down deep in the weeds.
Yeah.
Your perspective in terms of what we can do with the SDK and building out our own servers. Next, Arjun, we're going to talk about a more, I'd say, an implementation aspect of MCP specific to what Pinecone's doing. Do you want to take the floor?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike, Santiago, and Bill. I'm excited to talk about what Pinecone has built with our MCP servers today. Why don't we get started?
Fantastic.
So this is me.
Everyone.
I'm a senior developer advocate at Pinecone. All I do all day is think about how I can teach people to build with Pinecone, applications, all that sort of stuff. But you might be wondering, what is Pinecone and what can I use it for? Well, Pinecone is a special kind of database called a vector database in which you can upsert or store vectorized data, which is basically anything that you've turned into a vector that is a fixed size list of numbers that you want to search over really quickly. And often what a lot of users want to do is they want to enable a form of search called semantic search, which lets you ask natural language questions over your data and get back relevant results. So you might have something like this user query where you say, hey, what's happening in the news today? It gets sent to an embedding model. That embedding model hits Pinecone with the query vector, and we do this efficient search in vector space, returning the most relevant sources back to you. A lot of people are interested in developing applications on top of this. Today, we'll be talking about one way of doing so using the Pinecone MCP servers. We actually have 3 MCP servers. There is a local one with our assistant product, which I'll talk about shortly. We have a remote one with our assistant product as well. And then we have the developer MCP. I'll be going over each of those MCP servers briefly so you have an idea of what you can do with each one. But this diagram gives a really nice visual of what is kind of going on. With the assistant MCP, you get access to a context tool, which lets you query a pre-populated database of information in whatever application you're trying to build. But if you like to work with your indexes directly, the developer MCP lets you do that with a whole series of tools that allow you to manage your indexes in Pinecone. So first, I'll talk about the Pinecone Assistant tool. What Pinecone Assistant is a no-code, low-code agentic RAG in a box. All you have to do is upload a bunch of PDFs, PowerPoints, documents, you name it, to our console to create your assistant. And then you can programmatically access your assistant to generate answers conditioned on that data. We'll manage the pre-processing of the data for you, the chunking, even the query generation and the subquerying, the retrieval, the context expansion, and then the generation of the final answer. So if you're looking to kind of create chatbots really quickly, grounded on your data without having to worry about pre-generating or pre-processing the data that you're creating, Pinecone Assistant is a great way for you to do that. Now, the tricky part is once you've created your assistant, it can be difficult to kind of make that assistant accessible inside your other applications. And we'll talk about how the Pinecone Assistant MCP can kind of help you do that. I just realized I mixed up a few of my slides, so I'll talk about the developer MCP server first and then the assistant one. Our engineers built the developer MCP, and it's mainly useful for giving your IDE context about your Pinecone projects. Whether you're working in Visual Studio Code or Cursor or Claude Code, you might want an easier way to check if your indexes were created properly, to quickly query data from your indexes, upsert some data, not delete an index. You can't do that from the Pinecone MCP for obvious reasons, but you can also work with your indexes that are already there, so you're not constantly switching tabs between where you're developing, what you're looking at online. This is great if you want to learn how to use Pinecone really quickly, or if you want to quickly test your indexes or query them. What it's not meant for is any heavy upsertion workloads. So if you're trying to upsert like 10,000, 100,000, million vectors at a time, probably don't use the MCP server for that, but it can help you generate an upsertion script because we've given it a search docs tool that you can use. And if you want to use a third-party embedding model in addition to the Pinecone MCP, at this moment, you can't do that. If there's a lot of demand for that, we'll consider adding that in, but you'd have to use our integrated inference offering, which is embedding models that are hosted on Pinecone. The assistant MCP actually is really good for when you've built your AI applications and you want your AI applications the ability to consult an assistant that's been conditioned on a data set that you're interested in using. So for example, let's say you have a bunch of data over a bunch of your company like internal documents, and you throw all that into a Pinecone assistant. You can expose something called the context API through the assistant MCP. So if you have a driving application like your MCP client, it can reach out to the assistant, try to do a search over all of the data that you're interested in, and the assistant will pick the most optimal pieces of context to pass back to your client in order to answer or use your question. So this is great when you want to add context to your AI applications without having to deal with a giant preprocessing pipeline or anything like that. But it's not meant for developers that want this and deep index level access for their assistants. This is kind of the easier way for you to access the benefit of retrieval without having to do all the pre-processing yourself. For example, we have a notebook with this assistant context API that allows it to create study guides for individuals over open source textbooks. So you kind of throw all the textbooks that are open source into the assistant. It becomes this expert on whatever is inside that data and then sends the relevant contents back to you so you can kind of do what you need to do. Going back to the Pinecone Developer MCP, here are all the tools that are available. You can search our documentation. So if you're trying to understand how to use Pinecone in a certain way, you can use that tool inside your IDE in order to get the relevant pieces of docs back. You can list your indexes, describe them. You could create indexes specified on the integrated inference models that we've hosted. You can upsert records. You can even search or query over them as well, all using natural language. So if you created an index, for example, and you upserted a bunch of data and you just want to check to see if the data has been upserted, or if you want to see what happens if you query a certain query with them, you can do that entirely with the MCP, which is cool. You can do cascading search, which is a form of advanced retrieval. And you can also re-rank documents if you're interested in. So it's a lot of nice utility tools as of now. We don't have pre-built prompts or resources yet, but we're thinking about adding those. If the people from the community, if the developers from the community are interested in these things, please let us know, and we'd be happy to look into developing those things. And like I said prior, you can use the get context tool from Assistant to kind of ground your applications in what the Assistant is doing. So you might have some input, some orchestrating LLM here. It has access to a bunch of tools in addition to the Pinecone Assistant tool. You can use that information to either make another tool call or generate your final output without having to think about building that application yourself. I'd be really interested to hear if any of all have known about the MCP from Pinecone, or if you're building with Pinecone and you're looking for an MCP and now you know about it. If you want to learn more about the how Pinecone works and how you can get started, go to pinecone.md in your browser, type that, and it'll go take you directly to our docs page. Or you can hit this tiny URL to read our blog post written by my coworker Milen about how our MCP servers work in other languages, such as in other languages as well. Yeah, that's all I got for everybody. I'm really looking forward to answering everyone's questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Arjun. It's excellent to see what Pinecone's doing. And obviously Pinecone has been, a leader in everything that's happening in the vector database world, and how important that is to what's happening with AI applications right now. So right now I'd like to turn it over to Alden. Alden's going to give a presentation that basically focuses on what Custom GPT is doing with MCP and how it allows you to combine your business data with AI agents. So Alden, floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bill. So my name is Alden, and I'm the CEO of Custom GPT, and super excited about MCP here, right? Before I get into what Custom GPT is, we have some core principles about MCP that I wanted to make sure that we get across, right? The first one is that we believe that MCP should be as simple as a 65-year-old grandmother using USB to plug into an iPhone, right? We feel like this is such a connector glue, right, that it'll do for AI agents what HTTP did for the internet. Right now, what is Custom GPT? Custom GPT is a no-code platform we built where business users, like literally technical or non-technical, can create these custom AI agents, right? For people who are technical here, you'll know it as RAG, but for business people, they just know it as being able to upload their business content, like no code, just point, click, and then be able to get a system that can answer their questions, can be deployed to their website, make sure it does not hallucinate, all of those nice things that businesses really care about, right? As far as business users are concerned, they want file formats, they want to connect to their SharePoint or Google Drive, right? And more than anything, they want like true business metrics. Like they don't want it to hallucinate, they want accuracy, right? And those are the things that we concentrate on, right? And then along comes MCP, right? So we had this super powerful RAG, we benchmarked it against like OpenAI and Google and others. And as far as business use is concerned, we won in those benchmarks. It was more accurate, it was less hallucinatory, right? And now people said, okay, great, you have the RAG, like can we connect it to agents like Claude and Claude Code. So that's where we put in an MCP connector, right? But again, we wanted to make sure that it's true to the principles of business users, where anybody should be able to just grab the MCP endpoint and be able to use it, right? So with this, what can happen is the content that you have, whether it's your website, whether it's your documents, whether it's your SharePoint or Google Drive, right, can be exposed as an MCP server, right? One simple protocol, you bring in your various data sources. We have some RAG projects where people have connected their Google Drives, their SharePoint, their documents, their YouTube, their websites, right? And brought all of that together into one RAG project, right? So in case you're wondering, what do you do today, right? And you're not a developer, you don't want to get into all that pip install and all that stuff. Here is a simple exercise you can do, right? At Custom GPT, in less than 5 minutes, you can create your agent and get a simple copy pastable MCP server that you can plug into whatever your favorite tool is, whether it's Claude Web, whether it's OpenAI, whether it's Claude Desktop. And you should be able to do this in less than 5 minutes. So a full production ready stuff MCP server with no business or no technical information needed should be ready to go using this platform, right? And we are super excited about this new feature where our system can now also act as an MCP client, which means that similar to how Claude Code or Claude or OpenAI can call out to other MCP servers, you can now also define and add your own MCP servers so that the chat interface and the agent can do operations like calling HubSpot or send an email and other good stuff like that, right? And again, true to our principles, everything is no code here. You can just say add custom action and then be able to add your MCP server. And what does it do? What it does is that during the conversation, the LLM and the reasoning model will decide whether to call your MCP connector. And if it can call the connector or if it should call the connector, it'll go ahead and call it, which gives you the action that you want. So in this example, can you email the customer and move this call, right? It'll send an email, it'll update the call, it'll create a ticket, or whatever the action required is from the server, right? So with that, I will just quickly show like how easy it is to do this, right? So creating a new agent is as simple as just clicking and then uploading your documents or your website or whatever one of these 100 connectors that are there, right? And what do you get? Like, if you want to have an MCP server that is you can put into Claude or whatever other clients, it's as simple as just copy pasting this straight away, the URL, and there you have it, right? Or if you want to add your own MCP servers, you say add a custom action and bring in your MCP servers from other places, right? So once again, we are like super thrilled because what this does is it allows like various agents to now start talking to each other, as well as allow your RAG and your information to become exposed to other MCP clients, right? So with that, I will stop sharing and we can save time for questions.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much, Alden. Yeah, so we've covered a lot of ground. We talked about the protocol. We've talked about the, starting at the top level, we've talked about the kind of the purpose of MCP, We dove down into implementation. We've talked about use cases, and we've talked about a practical application. So with that, we're going to now open it up to questions. And we've collected a lot of questions. So I'm going to share my screen here. And with this, you'll be able to see the questions we've collected. Okay. And I want to remind anybody who hasn't yet asked a question, you can ask a question using the Q&A feature of Meet. So just click on the Q&A feature, type in your question. And we have Priyansh here from the Custom GPT team who will collect the question and add it to the queue. We've only got 20 minutes. I'm going to stop talking so we can get into the answers of these questions. But I'm just going to say we've got 20 minutes for question answering. All questions will be answered. And by that, I mean, if we don't cover it within the 20 minutes here, what we're going to do is we are going to put together answers to the questions in a blog post, and we'll share the blog post out via email using the email that you used to subscribe. All right, with that said, we'll jump into the first question here. And so the first question is with regards to the MCP protocol itself. So, you know, the reality is protocols come and go. Some gain steam, some gain adoption, some fizzle and die. Where are we with the protocol? Is it still in development? Is it stable? Can developers start building on it? Santiago, since you set the context there, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first that I should say is that, yes, it is under development, which is a good thing. We don't want development to stop. The second thing that I want to say is that every major player has jumped on it. So obviously Anthropic supports it, Microsoft supports it, OpenAI supports it, Google supports it. This is huge, and it's usually something that you don't see happening as fast as it has so far. So MCP is here to stay. As far as I know, there are no competing standards, like nobody else is trying to build something similar. Everyone has all of their chips on MCP working, which is a good thing, should be here to stay. So that's good. There is a bunch of questions that are related. I'm just going to take the next one anyway, but a bunch of questions that are related to security and authentication, and we can answer all of them at the same time. So first, MCP supports authorization. So that means that you can build an application and have the agent authorize a call to an MCP server on your behalf. Or the other way around. I'm sorry. Like, for example, let's say you want your agent to send emails on your behalf. Well, you can have through an OAuth 2.1 process to authorize that agent and create that secure connection. So now your agent is acting as if it was you and sending emails like if it was you. So that's there. That's how you will implement any sort of secure communication. That being said, there are many, many potential security issues with MCP. If you go to the specification page, there is a whole section there that's dedicated to these potential security exploits and how you should protect your application from them, okay? So don't think, hey, Santiago told me that authorization is supported, therefore this is great, and this is all solved. No, it's not. You gotta be careful, either if you're a developer or somebody who wants to take advantage of MCP servers. You gotta be careful, and you need to make sure you are not going to create a bigger problem, because there are many, many vectors here that could go wrong. So my recommendation is for you to go to the specification page, take a look at that section. Again, it's security, whatever. Let me see. I have the page here up. It's called Security Best Practices, and there is a lot there. Okay, so just yeah, that's related to security. What else?
Mike, you raised your hand. Do you have something you want to add?
Before we leave the security thing, I also want to point out that one of the key principles of MCP is that the human stays in the loop, that the human is aware and approves of any data that's flowing from the MCP into the LLM or from the LLM into the MCP. And so one of the most important things to do from a security point of view is make sure that human is consulted on all of these things so that inadvertent disclosures don't happen.
That's a great point. The next question goes on to actually something that focuses in on really how tools are selected, right? So in the demo that Mike gave with the random number generator, showed how somebody could ask a question and then the system selected the right tool and generated the random number. Mike, can you talk a little bit about the tool calling and how the tool calling works?
You bet. And this gets into some of the details about how MCP works in the AI application itself. So the idea is that an MCP server has a list of tools and a list of resources and a list of prompts, and the AI application can ask through the client what that set of things are. And you saw that in my demo, that it showed the tools that were provided. The host then takes that and puts it into the context window for the LLM. Okay, so the LLM now knows, here's a set of tools that you're able to use. And there's descriptions on those tools. So that the random number tool, for example, said, I'll pick a random number for you. And so the LLM looks at the set of tools, looks at what the user is asking, and tries to determine, well, is there a tool here that can do what I am being asked to do? And if it finds that there is, it comes back to the host and it says, okay, I'd like you to invoke this tool for me. Sometimes their tools have parameters, and it says, and here are the parameters that I want you to pass. And this gets back to my earlier point where the LLM asks the host to do this. And at this point, the host asks the user, is this okay? You want me to do this? And you saw that also in my demo, right? And if the user says yes, then the host goes and runs the MCP server tool, gets the output, and then sends that back to the LLM. So that's how that happens.
Yeah, it's interesting there because the quality of the tool selection is highly dependent on the LLM that you're using for tool selection, right?
It's dependent upon that, and it also depends on how many tools that you give it. So you saw that I unclicked all of those tools. Okay, I just wanted to ward off the demo gods there. But yeah, if you give it a lot of tools, then it can get confused.
Arjun, do you have something you'd like to add?
That was basically what I was going to say, in which case that because we are, like Mike said, literally adding the definitions of the tools and sometimes even the tool calls and even the outputs back inside the context window. If you have lots of tools and you don't use the majority of them, one, you risk overrunning the context window, in which case you're going to have really weird results kind of happening. But also, two, you might not even access the correct tool in the first place. So you might think that it's better to have more tools and more servers in your client when you're trying to do something. But in reality, you want to start small, test. When every time you add a new tool, you kind of want to test to make sure that tool is being called correctly instead of just trusting that the model will do the correct thing in the first place.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Arjun. And Arjun, since you're speaking, let's keep going. The question on the screen here from Jeffrey says, can the Pinecone Vector DB be used with any model, local or API? Does it need to run through the Pinecone MCP? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, Jeffrey, this is a great question. So in general, you can use our vector database with any embedding model, any generative model, because all you're doing is storing the data in Pinecone, and then what you do after you request with it is up to you. You could use an OpenAI embedding model. You can use one of our embedding models. As long as you can turn the data that you're working with into an embedding and then put it inside Pinecone and pull it back out, you're probably good. Same thing goes with the generative models, with the caveat being that if you query Pinecone and you get vectors back, you have to store the metadata of the documents in those vectors that you've stored in Pinecone in order for your generative model to actually understand what's going on, right? Like you can't pass the raw vectors to your model. That won't make any sense. You'll have to pass the documents that are being associated with those there. In the Pinecone MCP, however, The way it is currently implemented is it uses something called integrative inference on our end, which is just a fancier way of saying we have a few hosted embedding models that are open source that we've selected for quality. You can use those to create your indexes. So instead of working with vectors, you're working with text. You can just query our database directly with text, and you'll get text back because we've asked you to upsert that text in the first place, and we'll do the embedding and the retrieval for you on the back end. In that specific situation, when you're using the Pinecone Developer MCP, you can only use the hosted models that we have on the platform. And I believe we have three different ones. We have a sparse model that's proprietary from Pinecone. It's great for keyword search, advanced keyword search. And we have multilingual E5 large, which I actually think is a Microsoft research team model. And then we have a model from NVIDIA that's based off of Llama that you can use as well. So that's how you can use those things with Pinecone.
Fantastic. Appreciate that, Arjun. Alden, you're up next. The next question's for you. You can see it on the screen here. The question's from Adam. The question is, our government agency is using custom GPT and other products to develop an AI-powered advice agent. The agent using RAG is meant to assist our staff in processing questions from the public. Is MCP relevant to the use case? If so, how? Any thoughts?
Yeah. So if you're using our standard chat interface right now, you really don't need MCP. Like, people can use the chat interface, everything is happy. But very soon, you're going to find use cases where different applications and workflows that your government agency is using will need to talk to all this beautiful information that you have in your RAG, right? For example, if your government agency starts using Claude as their chatbot, right, then Claude can easily pull in this advice agent RAG that you have, right? Or maybe you'll use Zendesk as your ticketing system. And when a ticket comes in, you want to plug into your advice agent and help the help desk staff with, the information from the advice agent. So when your use case goes from pure chat to things like workflows, to things like agent talking to agent, then the MCP will be like just ready to go there. You literally copy paste one line into Claude or Zendesk or wherever your agent is, and you'll be able to have them talking to each other.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for Alden for that. The next question up is from Abdullah, who's asking, what are the performance, latency, and consistency trade-offs of MCP? Santiago, I want to throw this one to you. I completely understand where this question's coming from. When you have a distributed architecture here, you're talking to multiple systems. How do you consider these things in terms of your architecture design? Any thoughts that you have for Abdullah?
Yeah, 100%. Well, this is a loaded question. And this is why it really depends on you're comparing MCP to what would be the alternative. Like, are you thinking of not using tools and instead let's say you have a calculator tool. An alternative will be, instead of using MCP to access the calculator, let's just let the LLM figure out the answer to that computation. That would be an alternative. A potential alternative would be, let's hard code access to the calculator's API, low-level API, instead of using an MCP. So there are multiple alternatives here, but this is the way I think about this, and I suggest you think about this. So number one, MCP is going to be better in terms of latency than trying to let the LLM figure out what to do with multiple external calls. Like, for example, giving an LLM access to a browser and let the LLM figure out how to make calls to the web, it's gonna be way slower than just giving LLM very concrete tools for the LLM to execute things. Number two, MCPs are not a replacement for APIs. That is a problem. If you think about them like that, you think you're doing it wrong. APIs, think of them as the electrical connections in your house, the wiring in your house, low-level operations. That's how we always design APIs. MCPs is a way to implement a complete journey on top of the electrical wiring. So With an API, you'll get the sum, the addition, the division, the multiplication, low-level operations for a calculator. The MCP is not a good replacement for that. The MCP will perform a very specific equation. For example, it's probably a bad example here with the calculator, but hopefully you get the idea. The MCP will be a very concrete, way more consistent tool to access for the LLM than letting the LLM put together multiple low-level calls in order to accomplish that journey. So in that case, the MCP will be better. Obviously, having or adding many hubs, many MCP hubs, like you can have a tool that calls a tool, that calls a tool, that calls a tool, that will add a lot of latency to your system. And in terms of consistency, and again, like that's what I said, this is like a very loaded question. In terms of consistency in general, my recommendation is, if you're thinking of LLMs, when you get down the path of LLMs, is because you're throwing consistency away, meaning anytime you get into this world, keep in mind, LLMs make mistakes. They're going to call the wrong tool. They're going to pass the wrong parameters to the tool. They're going to interpret the result from the tool in an incorrect way. And the problem is not MCP here. The problem is the whole system that's being driven by an LLM. So anything that you can extract out of an LLM's hands and do it with just regular code, calling tools or calling APIs, you're going to be better off than letting an LLM figure all of this out. So sometimes the problems happen even before we get into the MCP world. I know I'm just answering like 1% of this question. Again, this is a big question here. Hopefully that gives you an idea of how I think about this.
Yeah, it's a big question, and it's a good question. And we'll definitely share more information about this in the blog post that we share out to everybody who's attending. This is, we're getting close to the top of the hour here. So this is probably going to be our last question. Mike, this one's going to be for you. It's on the screen here currently. Somebody's asking if they create an MCP server for information that they want to make publicly available, what tools do they use to maintain it? And they're speaking specifically here with regards to logging, monitoring calls, limiting, so on and so forth. So a lot of parts and pieces there. Anything that you want to surface in the context of the answer?
Sure. So you would use the same set of tools and techniques that you would use for pretty much an API server that you would be hosting, right? And in fact, what I showed you, the demo I showed you, was for a standard IO server, but we support remote servers, accessed over HTTP in the C# SDK, and all of the SDKs do. And the way that we do it in the C# SDK is we actually extend the .NET, ASP.NET Core capabilities for building web APIs and integrate that with our MCP SDK. So if you're familiar with ASP.NET Core, then you know that it has logging frameworks, it has metric frameworks, it has frameworks for open telemetry. It has all of these capabilities, and you would just leverage those when you're building your MCP server. And this would be true for the other languages too. Python has this, and Java has this, and TypeScript has this. So you would use those capabilities, those same capabilities, for logging and metrics and observability that are available in those languages.
Fantastic. We actually have 2 minutes left. So we have a couple questions left, but I'm actually going to turn it over to the panel here to see if anybody has any final thoughts that they'd like to share with regards to the future of MCP. So obviously here, we're at a very nascent state of the development of MCP, but future state, long-term. One of my favorite quotes, I was talking about Alden about this earlier, is, from Bill Gates, Mike, you'll appreciate this, is that we tend to overestimate technology in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. So thinking about future state of MCP, love to get everybody's 15-second reaction to this question. Alden, I'll turn it over to you first. What are your thoughts?
To me, The biggest thing here is that similar to what HTTP did for the internet, this will do for agent to agent communications, right? HTTP basically created the internet, and we now have websites and they talk to each other over HTTP, and browsers talk over HTTP. Same thing will happen here with MCP. Like you'll have agents talking to agents, and let my agent talk to your agent type thing is going to happen pretty soon. Uh, uh, and what Bill Gates is saying will definitely happen, but I think the timelines will just be
maybe a little compressed.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, Mike, how about you next?
Okay, so riffing on that idea, because I've been very involved in Open API for many years, I think MCP is sort of the Open API of this new world. And I say that because Open API is a very structured format. It's this JSON document that has all these fields, with all these different things that you can describe your API with. And now with LLMs that understand natural language, we don't actually need all that detail anymore and all those structured fields. We can just describe what the API does, what the tool does in natural language, feed that to the LLM, and it works great. So I think that's the other thing that's going to happen is we're going to see this move towards describing features in natural language and then just letting the LLM take over.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. Arjun, you're next, and then Santiago, you're going to close us out.
Yeah,
Sure.
I want to echo Mike's point about kind of accelerating the development of natural language interfaces to applications. I think once we've achieved a sort of standard on how we can access applications in a way that makes it easy for like LLMs to transform our statements into those set of tool calls, the next logical conclusion is, hey, let's just make everything really easy to use via natural language. So hopefully that means applications will be a lot easier to use in general. People will be able to kind of state their intents, we'll be able to understand them, and then turn those into tool calls and see what's going to happen. And one thing I like about that approach is that it's also very amenable to human review. So we can see what tool calls are kind of being issued and reject them or accept them and kind of work with these frameworks in this really specific way in order to get that kind of working. So I want to echo this point on like more and more natural language interfaces that make it easier to do things.
Excellent, Arjun. Thank you so much. Santiago.
Yeah, so obviously MCP is necessary. Without tools, there are no agents. Where my head goes to is I would like to see a future where agents are capable of discovering and auto-selecting the tools they need to use in order to solve a problem. So right now, the agents depend on us developers giving those agents the tools, saying, hey, you can use this and that and that and that. So what will happen when we tell the agent, I want you to solve this problem, and I don't give a blink of what tools you go and use. Go to this directory, find tools, make sure those tools are secure and they come from a trusted partner, and use those tools to solve your problem. And the agent will do that working with this directory. That is where my mind goes to. I think that will be a huge unlock because that will make agents very, very powerful. So yeah, that's what I want to see.
All right, thank
DNS
you.
for agents.
Go ahead, Alden.
Santiago looks like wants DNS for agents.
Right, something like that. Right, so something like DNS for agents. It's like yeah, that's basically it. Yep.
So there are many people that are building registries of MCP servers today, right? And I think that's a step towards this. Yep.
For sure.
All right, everybody. We went a little bit longer, but obviously we could talk about this for hours. I'm enjoying this conversation immensely. I hope you all are as well. And I want to thank all of our speakers here, Alden, Arjun, Mike, Santiago, so much for your time and expertise. I want to thank everybody for participating and asking questions. And as I said before, we're going to answer all the questions. We're going to answer them in the context of the blog post, and we'll send out that link using the email address that you registered with. So again, thank you to the speakers. Thank you to everybody who participated. And we're going to sign off now, and we'll see you in the next. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.